hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven.
There's been a lot of reaction to the president's speech. He laid out his plan to degrade and defeat ISIS militants.
While almost 40 countries have agreed to help the U.S., at least one of our biggest allies isn't quite on board. Colonel Rick Kiernan is NBC 10's military analyst. He joins us now from our Digital Operations Center.
And Colonel Kiernan served in the U.S. Army for 26 years in Germany, Vietnam, and Saudi Arabia. He was awarded 2 Bronze Stars, and he was Pentagon spokesman for the Army during the first Gulf War. As always, thank you so much for joining us, Colonel.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The president talked about a long-term, open-ended conflict here. It's something he vowed to avoid during his campaign for the White House. Do you see any kind of timetable for this U.S.-led conflict?
Yeah, I think what we have to do is look at a long-term strategy. You want to share the information that you do have a plan, you do have a strategy with the American people, and that, I think, sets up the resolve and the determination that we have in order to do 3 things. Number 1, we want to defend what we have. Second, we want to deter. And finally, we want to defeat the ISIS. That being said, we don't want to go ahead and show our cards too much because the intelligence and the morale of both sides can be affected.
We heard President Obama talk about a broad international coalition. Some of those partners, though, aren't on board. Germany and the UK say they're not keen on direct military action. How will that affect our efforts? And at the same time, there are questions now about who inside Syria will help us out.
I think we look at it 2 ways. The 2 countries you mentioned, of course, are NATO members. NATO has been around more than 50 years, and most of the contributions that they have made in the past as member nations has been what we call burden sharing. They've done that in Iraq. They've done that in Afghanistan. There are some other members of the coalition who will probably support either monetarily or with equipment. But I think we look at it 2 ways. We look at the region which is most affected, in this case, of course, Iraq and Syria, but it's also exacerbated by the fact that they have had some problems in Syria and that the Syrian rebels are trying to work within a civil war situation in that country. So I think this is probably the best first step that can be taken. But I think we have to caution ourselves in this era of instant messaging and things happening very quickly, that it takes a long time to put down a force such as this.
Yeah, speaking of a long time, the president's been in office now 6 years. He's been vowing to end the U.S. wars over there. Now, explaining why we decided to engage in a new one. In your opinion here, is there another strategy, or really have we exhausted all options before this decision?
I think the national security team, and of course, give good advice to the president, the commander-in-chief. But I think also we have to remember you usually start out with a diplomatic resolution, a diplomatic strategy. Then you go to an economic, as we've done with Putin and the Ukraine. And then I think your final one is military, because it shows a demonstration of force and power. And in the case of the enemies that we deal with right now, that can sometimes be the only thing that they would respect and worry about.
And Secretary Kerry echoed the president saying it will take time to eradicate ISIS. This is a long-term project. Colonel Rick Kiernan, thanks so much for your insight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now you're